On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don. I'm a digital marketer in life sciences. And in this episode of the Life Science Success Podcast, my guest is Dean Erhardt. He's the president and CEO at D2 Solutions. He brings more than 20 years of experience across pharmaceuticals and consumer products with expertise supporting program development, distribution, and specialty product management. So with that, welcome, Dean. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Don, thank you so much. It's an absolute privilege to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. And, I like to start these normally by just giving you the floor to just ask you to just tell us a little bit about your career journey and what was it that, led you to the intersection of pharmaceuticals, biotech, and strategic marketing?
Well, I think it's a couple of things, Don. First off, when you're young, like I was 100 years ago and started in this industry, right? You try to take a look at industries, or at least I did at the time, and say, where's their long-term growth? Where's there's long-term opportunities for a young person entering into a new career path, right? And by virtue of that, I really thought, the pharmaceutical world, the life science world was a place where I wanted to be. I was fortunate enough to get on with a staff model HMO at the time. So I worked on the insurance side of the business for a number of years. Then I ended up getting recruited to Cardinal Health, which is obviously one of the largest distributors. And I finished what was about a 20-year corporate career with a company called Express Scripts, which of course everybody knows is one of the larger PBMs. So my running joke, Don, is I saw the industry from the payer side, the distributor side, and the PBM side. And once I decided I couldn't really keep a job in either one of those sectors, I had to start my own company. Right?
That's funny because my joke always is that I'm unemployable. So that's that. I mean, you and I use similar sort of humor around the same thing that, like, hey, look, I can't seem to fit into a normal everyday corporate job anymore. So
yeah. So I think the exciting part about starting something new, and we really started this company with 3 core people, in 2008, and it was really about looking across the spectrum of how companies commercialize products and all of the challenges they have in that, and how those disparate systems really needed to come together so that you could really understand the impact of your distribution decisions and how they impacted your reimbursement decisions. And your reimbursement decisions and how they determined how a patient might access your medication or your medical device. So it was really kind of trying to streamline and bring together those pieces of the puzzle that we were thinking about when we started this journey.
And I mean, if you wouldn't mind, just could you take a little bit of time and tell us a little bit about some of the pivotal moments that you've had throughout your career when you look at things like the way you approach pharmaceutical commercialization or your distribution strategy today? What were some of the things that really sort of stand out in your mind?
Well, I think first and foremost, what we've learned over the years is that it's most important to get started earlier than later, right? And you've got to be thinking about what the choke points are as a manufacturer. And typically, one of those big choke points are, how do I truly differentiate my product in the market? And even for those organizations that say, well, I'm bringing out a new product. There's no other product in my category. It's a new molecular entity, et cetera. You got to step back, Don, and say, but how do they treat that patient today? And will this truly take over that option, right? And so even if there's not a head-to-head competitor, you got to take a look at what's happening in the real world. And I think sometimes we see a lot of people who don't think about that. And then the other piece really is to try to take a look at the continuum of the services you need. And we hear a lot today about how the middlemen take a lot of the piece of the pie, right? And, we see people getting called into Congress to testify on that. And I can tell you from my experience, that's very true. And sometimes that piece of the pie can be 50, 60, 70%. So you really have to think through your pricing strategy early in the process and where those pieces of the pie are that are going to take pieces of that process along that path.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I live in Colorado. It's taken us a long time, my wife and I feel like a long time to find healthcare providers that we feel really aligned around and things like that. And without naming the provider or anything like that, well, the interesting part to me is that they truly have to have all of the pieces of the pie. They have to have, the PBM, sort of elements of things. They must have, sort of the early, purchasing capability, on the front end of things. They also have certainly on the back end, the patient channels and things like that. But as a patient, right, I'm going, but I mean, I've had other providers that are all fragmented where the PBM is outside and, because you could say, hey, look, if we separate all these pieces, maybe it becomes better. But the reality is like, I mean, I think there's some fundamental change that needs to happen for all of this to have effect for people at the end of the day. I mean, not that that's what this episode is about, but I kind of, as a patient, I think about it and I go, I feel like I'm getting a benefit by having, all the pieces joined together, because having them fragmented sure didn't feel any better.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Don. And I think what you're expressing there is a frustration that a lot of patients, consumers experience, right? And look, at the end of the day, we're consumers. We want to be able to access healthcare just like we access other pieces of our world, right? Whether it be ordering groceries online, getting my Uber to go to the hotel when I'm traveling, whatever the case might be. But it shouldn't be so difficult that I don't know if I'm calling my payer or if I need to call my physician. Am I getting a call from somebody that's helping me, or is it a scam, or is this pharmacy that's calling me actually helping me get my product? It shouldn't be so confusing as a consumer that we don't know how to access these elements. And that's one of the things that we constantly focus on is how do we create that patient journey so we can take that patient from, okay, I have a prescription, I need to get a medication. I go to the retail pharmacy and it's not available. Now what do I do? To, okay, I'm getting that product and somebody's helping me understand, particularly if it's a high cost specialty medication, how do I take that medication? When do I take that medication? What should I expect when I'm on that medication? So we've got to streamline that process so that the patient, i.e. consumer, can be well informed along this pathway.
Makes so much sense. So in terms of your experience, I mean, the amazing thing to me is, I mean, I've had a lot of experience, I feel like, inside of the pharmaceutical arena on the drug development side. Certainly have spent a fair amount of time on the operations and execution side. In your world, I've spent zero time. So, I have no real experience, dealing with like the PBMs and kind of that last stage, right? So all of this is new
Right.
experience to me. But with your experience, you have experience with over 100 pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and medical device manufacturers throughout your career. What patterns have you noticed that separate companies that successfully bring products to market versus those that struggle?
I think there's two things that stick out in my mind, Don. The first one is that they plan early, right? So that they don't get to 6 months from their FDA approval or 3 months from their FDA approval and they have this Oshitaki moment where they say, now I have a million things to do and I don't have time to do them right. So planning early, and by early, I mean literally 18 to 24 months before you expect that FDA approval, to start getting in line all of the steps that you need to take, right? Because you've got to select a third party logistics provider. You've got to get your state licenses. You've got to do reimbursement studies and pricing research. There is a lot of heavy lifting along that path that I think many times, particularly in emerging pharma companies who tend to be brilliant scientists, but don't know a lot about commercialization, get themselves in trouble. So I'd say planning early is the first part. And then really knowing where your product fits in terms of your product differentiation and the type of patient you're going after. So that is really the second piece, so that when you're going in and you're negotiating with a payer, you're negotiating with a PBM, You have a clear definition of what they should expect for the type of patient you treat and the clinical outcome that you're going to create.
So tell me a little bit about D2 Solutions. What is it that you do? What's your core mission? How do you serve the people that you currently serve in the pharmaceutical and biotech organizations?
We really have a couple of different divisions within the construct of D2, but if we talk first about the pharmaceutical side of the business and how we support pharma and biotech clients, it's really three areas that we focus on, right? So we're not going to help you get your FDA approval. That's not who we are. We're really past that point. But it's distribution. How do you get your product into the channel? Who are the right channel partners? How do you contract for that, leveraging or understanding rather fair market value requirements? Then how do you go to a payer and get on formulary or get a medical coverage policy, but make sure that your product is paid for? Because, in a third-party payer environment, if you're not paid for, you don't have a product. And then ultimately, what are the patient services that you need to get a patient on product and keep them on product through getting a positive clinical outcome? In some cases, those are not very difficult. In some cases, those can be very, very difficult. And so it's really those three pieces of the puzzle that we focus on. We have other parts of our business that focus more on the pharmacy operation side. And in that instance, it's about really helping pharmacies become more efficient in how they're operating and more efficient in terms of things like accreditation requirements, licensing requirements, regulatory requirements. So and it kind of all ties together because we launch a lot of products in the specialty space. So it's not just, hey, Mr. Pharmaceutical Manufacturer, here's what to think about, but it's also, and we know the distribution channel providers like the back of our hand. We can share with you which ones are a good fit for your specific needs. And tying those two things together, I think, makes us a unique partner for many of these organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I find oftentimes too is that the more that you have to fragment the thinking in a lot of these things. It's the same thing with us as an agency, right? We tie a lot of pieces together so that, hopefully clients aren't having to go buy, services from lots of different places. And with that, we continually hear people say that, look, in our past world, we've just had stuff, get dropped and then not get picked up on the other side. So it has to be powerful having that combination as well.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? Because you certainly tried to make that argument that you want to streamline this process, and you get caught somewhere between, I want one throat to choke, and I never get fired for hiring IBM. So what happens if I go hire a multi-billion-dollar company to do this? And even if it fails, I don't look bad because it wasn't a bad choice. So it's trying to straddle that middle ground sometimes that becomes an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I can say that. With one of the groups that I'm currently working with, there's a behemoth that they've decided to partner with, and what I see, similar in their go-to-market strategy, is that they're very frustrated oftentimes by being told this is the way that they do it, and there's no other way to think about or do something else, right? And that's, I think the opportunity as well to sort of contract with somebody like yourself and D2 is just this this idea of, hey, look, there's lots of ways to get to skin the cat normally. And if you want somebody that is willing to build much more of a solution around you versus telling you what the solution has to be, that's really your decision. I feel like at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've developed, Don, that's been very unique, because we have also developed a variety of technology solutions, and we now have the ability to go to a manufacturer and say, okay, look, you picked XYZ to support your efforts, right? But where are their strengths and where are their weaknesses? And are there weaknesses there that we can, whether it be with one of our tools or another partner's tools, we can fix that? Then it doesn't have to disrupt your whole world in terms of taking that patient service model and putting it somewhere else. But we can take a look at where the gaps are. And if we can fill those gaps, maybe it's a better way to capture the patient at the physician office. Maybe it's a better way to do appeals when you need to do a prior authorization appeal. But if there's gaps there that we can fill in those gaps to make your program better, then we can still help support that without you having to go through the process of having to revamp your entire model.
Makes a lot of sense. So significant part of your expertise really lies in pharmaceutical support programs and specialty pharmaceutical product management. For listeners that really don't understand what this, is, can you just explain what they look like and why are they so critical for a product success?
Yeah, so if you think about pharmaceutical support programs, Don, typically those are for specialty pharmacies for more orphan, rare, high-cost disease states, right? It's not I'm going down to Walgreens to pick up a $2 generic. That's not really what this is about. But I may have just gotten diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, right? And now I have to go pick up an IVIG product, and this product is going to cost $200,000 a year. Well, if you're a patient, number one, you just got diagnosed with a disease you probably don't understand very well. And you were just told that the cost of the product is more expensive than your house. So how are you going to deal with this? And that's what these really pharmaceutical support programs are all about. It's about helping the patient to go through that pathway to say, okay, we can get you on product. We can help you understand the nuances of that product and what it means to be able to take that product. Are there going to be potential side effects? And maybe there's some ways to alleviate and or address those. And then, we can also work with your insurance company to make sure the product is covered through your insurance. And if you have an onerous copay or co-insurance, are there pathways to find ways to be able to offset that in some fashion? So that's really about what a care model is. And I'll give you a quick example of one that we've been working on for years with our digital engagement platform, where the patient gets on the product, and this happens to be a product where it's a 7-day on, 7-day off product, high side effects, and it also has a food effect, for those people that don't know what that means in this case, you cannot eat an hour before you take the medication, and you cannot eat for an hour after you take the medication. And so what we do is we communicate with that patient literally every day during the 7 days that they're on the medication, reminding them, when to take the medication, don't eat, when they can eat after they take the medication. We have a short survey, 3-4 questions every day that we go in and ask them to see how they're feeling. And the beauty of this particular model is that if they want to, we are auto set up to be able to connect them with a nurse case manager. So I'm not feeling good today, or, I'm having a rash. I never had a rash before. I don't know what's going on. We can tell them, here's when the nurse case management team is available this afternoon. Would you like to talk to somebody? And we can schedule it for, this afternoon at 2:00. And so it's a great model that demonstrates you can really create patient support if you just step back and think about what's in the best interest of this particular product and this particular patient base. So the second major product in terms of, I think it was specialty pharmacy product management. It's really working with the pharmacies in many cases to be able to help them understand what that patient journey needs to look like, and then setting up programs not dissimilar to the one that I just described.
Both sound so important. I mean, I find it sad in a lot of ways that in the United States, especially, and, maybe some other countries, but there are other parts in the world that do this so much better than the United States does. Where whenever you are very sick, you are more or less on your own to kind of figure out your way forward, right? And the support that you guys provide, sounds like it'd be very valuable to that, that very vulnerable part of the population that is going through something, catastrophic in their life. And so very important for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, the U.S. healthcare market, because it grew up very disparately, right? Physicians kind of go in one path, hospital systems another path, pharmacies in another path. And so they didn't get very well integrated. But we're certainly seeing today where organizations are moving towards that path, right? So the Kaiser model is something that we're seeing, built out by other integrated systems. You're seeing where organizations like PBMs and hospital systems are becoming one organization. Of course, you've got some of the large PBM/healthcare systems out there that are acquiring and buying up more physician groups. So, you're seeing where people are trying to get to that pathway. Now, getting all of those pieces connected, even if it's under one umbrella, is still going to be a little bit of a journey. But I think, and it's going to be interesting because if you leave one system and go to another system, are you going from a integrated system to a non-integrated system, or vice versa? So there's going to be a lot of I think a lot of spading to do yet before we see where that ends up.
Yeah. So you touched on this in one of your answers right at the very top of the interview here. You've worked with like small and mid-sized pharma and biotech companies in your past. I'm just curious, what unique challenges do the smaller organizations face compared to some of the larger players, and how do you help them overcome the hurdles?
Yeah, I think in a word, I can probably say resources, right? Now, those resources may be dollars, maybe people, maybe be a level of talent within their current infrastructure that they just don't have. And many times they're aware of it, but they still just can't, support that. And so how do you find the right outsourced organization where you can buy those services you need, maybe at somewhat of a fraction of the price of hiring it internally, and be able to know that you're going to execute? Because I think one of the big challenges for pharma companies that are emerging and have to commercialize a product is that you have a lot of big bolus of activity right during that commercialization process, right? So let's say, 12 months before to 12 months after, you have a bolus of activity. But after that 12 months after, a lot of that goes down. So does it make sense to hire an army when you may need only a partial army after the fact? So I think what we see is a real struggle with organizations to do that. And it depends a lot upon, the management team, how much experience they have, where they came from. We've also seen many organizations that hire an army and a year later have to let that army go because they don't have the sales to support what they had hoped would happen. And so, how do you, I guess, how do you, how do I end with this? Hope for the feast, but plan for the famine, right?
Right, right.
Well,
Makes a lot of sense. So the pharmaceutical distribution landscape has evolved dramatically over the years. What are some of the most significant shifts that you've seen? And then how are companies adapting their strategies in response?
Well, look, we've got a major problem with the retail segment in that we're seeing more and more what they're calling retail deserts, right? Where particularly in remote arenas, you just don't have any pharmacies left. So how are those patients, going to access product when the closest pharmacy might be 20, 30, 50 miles away? So there's that dilemma. You've got the FDA pipeline, which is really driving more and more specialty products. And so and those don't really fit in any retail environment. But probably the biggest thing that we see happening in today's world is this whole direct-to-consumer model, right? So you've got Lilly Direct, you've got Trump RX, you've got all of these models out there now that have been created that are all about having the ability to get that patient to be able to order product and get that delivered directly to their home. And I think we're seeing, even for small and mid-sized organizations, they're leaning into that very, very heavily. First off, they can have a direct relationship with that patient. So now they can guide the patient journey, but also really inform the patient about how to get product, when to get product, and make sure that they're getting it appropriately. And there's also the issue around the cost structure, right? The infrastructure costs with all these intermediaries has gotten to the point where, in some cases, if I just go direct, I've actually saved myself money from working with some of the intermediaries. So from a pharmaceutical manufacturer perspective, I can control my patient's experience and I can increase my gross to net. That's not a bad outcome.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. In the national accounts area you specialize in, can you share how what your approach is to building and managing these relationships, and then what makes your national account strategy effective in today's market?
Well, you said the key word there, Don, and that's relationships, right? And I think what makes us different than a lot of organizations is the team we've had. We've been blessed to have most of the people on our team that have been with us 12, 14, 15 years, right? And so they have relationships at those payers that just literally can't be replaced. So when you're a small company and you're going to launch your first product, your biggest challenge is getting that product in front of a payer, right? And you might hire somebody who does, has great relationships. And then all of a sudden somebody at, payer X leaves and he no longer has a relationship. Or because you're a one product company, they give you one opportunity to come in and tell your story and then you're done. In our world, because we represent multiple manufacturers, multiple, I would say non-competing manufacturers, and we're in these relationships long term. Well, look, if you need a relationship with United Healthcare, I've got a person that's calling on United Healthcare 3 times a week. So we can tell your story and we can get that story heard multiple opportunities to do that because of those types of relationships.
And I mean, just so it's clear to me as well, when companies engage you, I mean, I have in mind a couple of different companies that I would think might be good, possible partners for you. One thought that I have is, what sort of stage are they in? Have they already tried some of these things to go out and do this themselves? Or are they, and I'm thinking like smaller companies, not
Right.
very big companies, right? So whether they're medical device, pharmaceutical, or biotech, before they, reach out to some of these, bigger organizations, are they working with a company like yours and engaging you then, or are they normally coming later and saying, "Hey, look, we tried this and we failed, so
Yeah.
we're trying to find a different way in"?
Look, in an ideal world, we love to work with clients before they've made those commitments because we can hopefully help them not stub their toe along the way, right? And not sign a contract when we say, oh, you may be paying for services that you actually don't need to pay for. Or, you signed a contract, but we know that same vendor would do this for 15% less if you negotiated a little more difficulty, right? So yeah, the ideal world is to be able to have the opportunity to help them early in the process. But there are many more cases in our world where we're brought in to help clean things up, right? We have my distribution network, but I'm having problems. I'm not getting coverage with payer X, Y, and Z. Can you help me? So we have a lot of situations where we get called in and say, asked to clean something up, and it's the nature of the beast. So we're happy to make our best attempt. And at the very least, we can typically sit in a room, figure out where their challenges are, and at least guide them on how to fix those challenges.
Makes sense. As you look ahead, what trends and innovations in pharmaceutical commercialization and specialty pharma are you focused on right now? And then how are they shaping the work that you do right now?
Yeah, well, I think technology and AI is, we're reaching a really exciting place from that perspective. And look, there are certain elements of this in terms of capturing the patient early in the process. The prior authorization problem that we have in the marketplace is astronomical, and the appeals challenge is even bigger. I mean, I'll read articles that tell me, and we've just done an independent survey with over 1,000 patients in the U.S. And that survey is telling us, greater than 60% or 70%, I don't remember the exact number, struggled at some point with getting access to their medication because of a prior auth. Well, we've got to figure out how to solve that, right? I'm not saying that a payer shouldn't have a prior auth, but we should have a prior auth process that is seamless and that as long as they get the right information up front, they approve it in a timely fashion. And look, the federal government is clearly going down the path of trying to address that in some fashion as well. But I think, enabling the patient to be able to access medication and get on medication quicker is an important element. We see where, particularly again with specialty medications, but even with sometimes with what we call tweener products that aren't really specialty, but they don't really fit well in retail, it might take 3-4 weeks for a patient to get on that product. I talked to somebody just not so long ago that told me it took them 3 months, and that is just beyond the pale in terms of poor management somewhere along the path.
Yeah, makes complete sense. What is the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received, and how's it influenced the way that you lead and advise others?
I think it's really set a vision and then, try to help people really stay focused on that vision. I read a book some years ago and The guy was getting interviewed, and they said, "What is your secret to success?" He said, "I only had one secret, but I told it a million times." And so, sometimes it's just about keeping people focused on, what is the most important element. And look, in our world, and we talk about it at every, team meeting that we have in terms of our corporate wide meetings, it's all about the patient. And whether we touch that patient directly or whether we're touching them indirectly because we're supporting an accreditation for a pharmacy or we're running a prior auth process that nobody sees, but we're the technology in the background, right? So whether we're seeing that patient direct or whether we're doing something indirect, we're still helping that patient get on medication. And I like to remind our team that that's really our most important focus.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's a lot of organizations that are devoid of that sort of early point that we're all aiming for. And then secondly, the level of focus to try and get there, right? So um, I oftentimes run across, I feel like a lot of these organizations, especially whenever they're small, right? The leader,
Yep.
may just not have had the experience where, setting a vision and executing against the vision and having the focus, really was clear to that leader before they started leading themselves. And I think your point is really spot on. It's, being able to do that and provide that clarity for people, clarifies things for them, but it also gives them that North Star to aim for.
Yeah, and we revamped our slogan last year to say basically our job is to help our partners, capture, keep, and care for patients. And that's really where we want to maintain our focus. Because if they do a better job by virtue of something we help them with, that's something we can hang our hat on.
Yeah. Well, Dean, what inspires you?
Well, I think right now, what really inspires me is just the innovation going on in the market and what's going on with the AI space. And I contend that AI may not run our life, but it's certainly going to be an active part of all of our lives, and it's going to be an active part of what happens in healthcare. And we're seeing examples of where I'm hearing of doctors being able to do surgeries from 1,000 miles away because they have a medical device in with the patient, and they're on a machine and they're manipulating that device. Just fascinating technology, right? I talked to an organization the other day that is working to introduce a hologram model where if I'm in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, I can be speaking to a specialist whose hologram is right in front of me, who's with the Mayo Clinic. And so I can get the care and the attention I need, even though there might be a 1,000 miles separating us, right? So I just think that where we're at in terms of innovation in our industry is just really, really an exciting time.
Yeah. I mean, the really exciting part for me too is, just watching, as you mentioned a few questions ago, all the shifts in healthcare have caused kind of a reduction of the ability to be able to get to care providers in general. And now all of a sudden, not only are rural areas, having this challenge of maybe not always having the best care, the best path for a particular issue that somebody has, but in addition to that, now they may not have a care facility at all. It just got shut down. And so, that with all of that at play, it's like, this technology might actually be a big benefit to us in the future.
Well, and then take the next step, Don. And I don't know if your audience is really aware of this, but there is a chasm coming in the healthcare space that you read through the American Medical Association and others, where we're going to have a dramatic shortage of doctors, a dramatic shortage of nurses. And I think they said like 3.9 million in terms of shortage of healthcare workers. And so the only way to solve for that problem is going to be via technology. And, we're kind of excited that we work with organizations, and within the construct of ourselves, we're trying to be part of that solution. So, and look, not everybody's going to want to talk to a bot, right? So you still got to have some human element. But if 80% of the phone calls that you're making can be driven by AI or technology, and then you reserve that phone call with the patient for a meaningful conversation, I think there's a path there that we're trying to get down.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, also I've commented on previous episodes as well that if people aren't aware of all of the, current funding issues that we have, through the NIH and others, the third or fourth level of this, issue that you're describing that is also coming is the next round of drugs. I think there will be a, approximately a 10-year void that people go, where's the next cancer drug? Where's the next Parkinson's drug? Where's those drugs that were being investigated by these little tiny companies that couldn't survive over the chasm of death? Um,
Right.
it's really unfortunate because not only we have a healthcare provider shortage, it's a real challenge to watch some of the things that are happening in the drug space too. But the next question I have for you might lead right into this, which is what concerns you?
What concerns me is probably the continual aging of the population in conjunction with what we just talked about in terms of shortage of healthcare workers, right? So how do you balance that there's going to be more patients in the mix and less people to take care of those patients? So I think that's an element that we've really got to think through, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't think I have an answer while I sit here today, but certainly, again, technology's a piece of that puzzle, right? I think the other thing that concerns me is I read many times about people who, go to retail, they have a prior auth and it gets stalled and then the patient just gets lost. And so now you've got a patient out there that clearly needed to get a medication because their doctor determined that whatever reason they needed to get on something to help their healthcare move forward, and they've just gotten lost in the system. So we're really focused on how do we help that patient not get lost in this process.
Yeah, a very important point as well. Last question for you. What excites
Yeah.
you?
Well, I think we talked about it a lot, which is technology, right? I mean, 100 years ago when I was in school, I actually got a minor in computer science, and then I didn't look at, anything from a computer science perspective for 20 years. And then all of a sudden we got pretty excited about innovation a few years ago. And that's really the exciting part. I think technology can provide us a vehicle to get things done that we didn't before. And look, we're even talking to some companies who are using technology, as I'm sure you're reading, to be able to accelerate drug approval. And so that'll be interesting. And now with the FDA changing the requirement that you need only have one trial versus two trials, I think in some instances we're going to see products coming to market faster. I think your earlier point, though, it doesn't solve for those that are going to run out of gas, i.e. funding, before they get to the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very, very important point. I mean, I think technology affords us an awful lot, and will help with a lot of this stuff. And I certainly hope that it has, a greater impact overall. Well, Dean, I do appreciate you coming on the Life Science Success podcast, and I appreciate you telling us about D2 Solutions and what you're working on. I mean, it sounds like the work that you're doing is so impactful, and I really appreciate the story. And wish you all the best in the future.
Don, thank you so much. It's been a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.